Hi, welcome back. Welcome back. I'm Theresa Bruno. I'm the host of the Soul Talks podcast, and I'm just thrilled to get to sit today with TJ Woodward. I have looked at his work for a long time in addiction recovery, and I have looked at his teachings as an agape minister. And so I just can't wait to share with you this incredible work, this spiritual leader, renowned keynote speaker, best-selling spiritual author, and addiction recovery expert has to share with us today. I feel like I'm talking to a guru and a friend. TJ, thank you so much for being with us. This is long overdue for me. I've just heard so much about you.
Oh my gosh, well, I'm so happy to be here, Teresa. Let's focus on the friend part. Let's be
I love that.
what could be better than that, right? Because each of us is a guru, right? And none of us are a guru.
I don't feel very much like a guru. But I wanted to start with something I think will be very interesting to our listeners. And take me back to you as a young person. I've read your story and I don't want to give it all away, but what led you to become an expert in addiction recovery?
Well, I mean, the expert piece is really my own journey with my own addiction, struggling as a, late teens and into my very early 20s. I got sober right before I turned 21. But going back is really important because my earliest memories are memories of being really happy. And I like to start there because I look at what people are looking for in therapy or recovery or a spiritual community or a transformational workshop is actually innate to a very young human. People want to feel their feelings more. They want to be more present. They want to be more open. They want to be more loving. And the reason I like to start with that is that was just my natural way of being. And when I look at a small child, a pre-programmed human, they seem to do that naturally. And so I start with that because I think a lot of times we think we're moving towards something. In actuality, I think we're actually returning to something under all the layers of the stuff that we've picked up along the way.
That's amazing. And I've read that you sort of had a pivot at about 7 years old where you started to feel a disconnect from yourself.
Yeah, it was actually a profound experience. And I can remember the felt sense of it. I was 7 years old. I was at my dining room table with my mom and my sisters. And I actually had a sensation, like a physical sensation of my heart closing. And I don't know what a 7-year-old's mind was telling me, like what was I thinking at that point, but I know how it felt. I became afraid. And I remember just feeling like I shut down. I can look back now in retrospect and realize that was a strategy for survival. I don't like to use the word coping mechanism. I call these things brilliant strategies.
I know, I love that you say that. That's such different language than I've ever heard in any kind of recovery speak.
I've had some pushback on it. I'm not going to lie. I've had a couple of people say, there's no way you can call addiction a brilliant strategy. We shouldn't be telling people that. So I want to dive in a little. The reason I call it brilliant is all the mechanisms that we develop, usually as really small people, did serve us in some way. And so if we look at them as bad or wrong, it's much more difficult to let go of or to move beyond. But if we look at the brilliance they once were, then we can start to ask ourselves, is it still brilliant? Is it still serving me? Because I have this profound idea. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
We don't change unless we want to.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so how do we get in touch with what we truly want? And the addiction or that strategy of closing my heart, it was there for a reason. I was very afraid and there were a lot of factors that led to that. So it's really about unlearning that. My parents were in a very loveless marriage. I've made peace with both of them. We have beautiful relationships today. But when my parents got divorced when I was 14, when they separated, I literally said to my dad, what took you so long? And he acknowledges now that he never wanted to be in that marriage, but felt like he needed to be.
Yeah, and children feel every bit of that. And so it was natural for you to have fear. What's going to happen with, to us as a family? What's going to happen to my mom, whom I'm so close to? I think those fears, you were internalizing. So take me from 7 to, I think, what was it, 12 or 13, when you began to drink and then discover drugs?
It's really close to 7-year cycles. It's very interesting. At 7, I had this profound experience of closing my heart. somewhere around 14, could have been a little bit earlier, I discovered drugs and alcohol. And then at 21, 7 years later, again, is when I got sober. So there are these 7 year cycles. And yes, when I discovered drugs and alcohol, I mean, weed was given to me. I remember the sensation of feeling so much relief. And of course, I'm not the only one saying this, but I understand, or I realize that addiction or the substance is never the problem. It's always a solution that has lost its effectiveness.
And I'm curious, that leads me to something because you live such a beautiful, directed spiritual path in your life now. Did you live in a home that was religious, Christian, spiritual? What were your underpinnings of spirituality?
It's such an interesting question, and it's very astute that you're asking that question, because I think I hear a lot of people who I know in their church, they're taught there's something fundamentally wrong with them. I was so lucky. My home wasn't particularly spiritual at all or really religious, but I did grow up singing in a very traditional men and boys choir in the Episcopal Church. And I actually felt so much peace and love there. I don't know if I absorbed the teachings. I don't really remember a lot of that, but I remember that was kind of a safe place for me, interestingly
That is
enough.
such an unusual story. That is the antithesis of what I hear in so many other stories.
Yeah,
I love
I,
that for
I
you.
had that experience and I feel so grateful for it. My dad also sang in that choir, and it was a place that I felt safe. It was a place that I felt some kind of spiritual energy. Again, I didn't really necessarily absorb a lot of the religious teachings, but it was a place of awe, a place of safety. So it was kind of like felt safer than my home in a lot of ways. So I had I guess it makes sense because I had such an early positive experience around all of that.
So, did you sing sacred classical music?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Very
one of my loves.
traditional. Yes. Yeah. We went to England when I was 14 and sang for the Archbishop of Canterbury and sang at St. Paul's Cathedral.
Oh my gosh.
Like, it was quite a beautiful experience for me. And I think the music, and I think there's a reason I'm saying this, the music had so much spirit for me. Again, it wasn't so much the teachings, it was more the energy,
Yeah,
right?
and
And
music
so
is
that
transformative in and of itself, the way it connects us to ourselves and to spirit. So, yeah, I don't think that was an accident in your life that that was happening. Do you still sing?
I do not still sing.
Oh,
Maybe in the shower, but nowhere
not even at church.
nope, nope.
Okay, so where you're 14 and you're feeling relief from the drugs and alcohol. It's giving you a sense of relief. When
Yeah.
in that 7 year period did you know you were an addict?
Well, it's a fascinating thing, right? Because I kind of have a different point of view around all that. I'm not really a big fan of the framework of alcoholic or addict. I think for me, I had lost my way. I had disconnected at age 7. I felt so damaged and broken, and I felt so much shame that alcohol brought so much relief. And then, of course, I think the question for all of us, if we're either have a loved one who is working through an addiction or active in an addiction, or we are ourselves, where is that line? And I don't have that answer for anyone. I know for me, one, it kind of quit working the way it once did. My last year of using was just this real low level search for spiritual meaning. And so I felt so broken, and it was like I had my umbilical cord in my hand and trying to plug into anyone or anything to feel relief. And I think that the distinction for me, where we might call it moving into addiction, classically we would say it starts causing problems, but I think for me, actually, it quit bringing relief from this sense of spiritual bankruptcy or emptiness, and I just kept trying more and more, but I felt emptier and emptier. So perhaps that's where the line was for me.
Interesting to me because 20 is young to feel a spiritual bankruptcy. You were obviously very aware and very awake in your spirit to feel the absence of it.
That's such a great way to frame it because that's exactly how I felt. I felt an absence of, and when we think about spirituality, it's so easy to connect it with religion. And obviously, for some people, they want to, for others, they don't. For me, spirituality is that sense of peace, it's that sense of connection to self and others, it's that sense of worthiness, of purpose. And all of that felt bankrupt for me. Like I felt very empty. And again, I was just trying to like capture that experience externally through drugs and alcohol and relationships. And I just felt emptier and emptier.
Did I read somewhere that you actually said addiction is a gift?
I probably have said that. And I don't remember when I said that, but
Spun
as you're
me on
asking,
my wheels and went, oh, I get it. I get it. Because it's the gift that leads you to your purpose. If you can find a path.
yes, I do think in my own journey, I can't really answer for anyone else, but in my own journey, that sense of emptiness led me to a place of willingness, and it led me to a place of darkness, right? When we think about, we hear about the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul isn't sadness. Like a lot of us experience sadness at, any time in our life, we might have something happen. Dark night of the soul to me is having had a sense of connection, meaning, and purpose,
Mm.
and then losing the ability to feel that. And that really was my addiction. That's what it felt like. And then getting sober allowed me to begin to reconnect with that. So I can say that it truly was a gift because it accelerated the process for me.
Yeah, you were young. So would you say at 7 versus 2021 that you, in your child place, had that sense of belonging and purpose?
Yeah, I mean, pre-7, I remember just feeling like the luckiest kid alive, like mesmerized by life, like lying in the backyard and just feeling the sun on my face and seeing birds and butterflies. I mean, like life felt magical.
But
And
that's
for me, it
also
was
connecting
pretty.
to spirit. I mean,
That's right.
nature connects us to spirit. Nature opens us up emotionally. I mean, I'm getting you. I'm getting it. So the one very curious next pivot I think was you got clean, and I guess you had not been using or drinking for what, a year or 2 years, but you still had this horrible emptiness, and it even felt suicidal.
Yes. So what happened in my journey is putting down the drugs and alcohol brought so much relief. And I had experienced so much happiness, and I found community and support groups and friends, and I was going to work every day, just very simple things that were making me so happy. And then somewhere between a year and 2 years, I'm going to estimate around 18 months, all of that emptiness came back up. And I think what happened for me, and I'll say for me, is I needed to do some of the deeper work of healing because drugs and alcohol were masking that sense of emptiness. And then getting sober was still kind of, I hadn't really addressed it. I did feel happier. I did feel grateful to have connection. But at that point, around 18 months sober or so, I found myself feeling very suicidal, and it took me on a new journey. But it started with reconnecting with that sense of emptiness and despair.
I'm going to interject something here because I think transparency is important. And you are triggering a lot of things in me, so my mind's kind of on fire. Um, my husband committed suicide 5 years ago, and just yeah, some life went away as I knew it, and I spent 5 years um, rebuilding my life and my children's lives. And but it's very curious when we talk about you as the 7-year-old and you as the 21-year-old experiencing that loneliness. We had been working with a therapist for about a year because my husband had gotten very, he wouldn't have called it depressed, but despondent, and um, a lot of reasons around all of that, but certainly never thought he was headed to suicide. Didn't even think that that was a possibility in our world because we were so about the kids and our lives together. And um, But the therapist who had been working with us said to me afterwards, his suicide started in childhood. And that was a really unusual concept for me. But when you are outlining these kind of phases of your life, I can clearly see, James was my husband's name, I can see how he probably experienced some of the same, and that despondency and lack of self and belonging that he had young. Maybe he never, and his father died and he was very connected to his father. There were a lot of reasons, but I just wanted that transparency between us as we talk, because you might see me trigger.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think our stories have so much power, and there's no surprise that we're having this conversation together right now. And just the weight of that and all the layers of what it's like to be you in the midst of that. And then obviously to have been him in the midst of that too. And I think about, the roles that we play, right? To be a good father, I think probably did, I'm guessing, keep him around maybe. And then
I think, yeah, his love for us kept him around way longer than he wanted to be on this earth. And, he was trying to get two boys grown into men, but couldn't quite get that far. Um, but anyway, yeah, when you talk about that period of just separation, separation from belonging, I really understand.
And I feel called to also just speak to men. And one of my greatest passions is helping men, because we do receive messages from a very early age to be strong, to be brave, to use our intellect, to use our physical strength, to be the breadwinner. Like, the messages are so deep. I mean, women have their own set too. And I know gender roles are changing a lot, but most of us still receive the idea of what it means to be male, to be strong and not talk about feelings and not be vulnerable. And the truth is, if we don't carve out some relationships where we can really get into the emotional piece of it, it can unfortunately lead to suicide. And I don't know the percentage, but it's dramatically higher in men than in women. Not to say that women don't have their own set of things that can be very challenging, obviously.
No, but you're exactly right, and it leads me to what I've read about your conscious recovery framework. The very thing you were saying in being called to work with men, because they often, with all the messaging in our culture, get separated from their emotions. Talk to me. Explain conscious recovery framework.
Yeah, it's intricately linked to the experience I had when I found myself suicidal at around 18 months sober, because I met a woman. Her name is Mary Helen, and she was this incredibly enlightened being who took me on a journey. And the journey wasn't really her teaching me, it was the way she saw me. And that has become the foundational framework of conscious recovery, because I think many people see themselves as damaged or broken. I certainly did. So much shame, so much disconnection from my spirit, so much trauma that hadn't been addressed. And she came in and said, underneath all of this, she didn't, not in her words as much as in her viewpoint of me, saw there was still a place of wholeness within me. And that has become the foundation of conscious recovery. The foundational principle is, underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that is whole and perfect. And that the way we view ourselves, if I'm struggling with anything, a mental health concern or an addiction, or the way we view our loved ones, and certainly most of my work now is working with clinicians, how are they seeing their clients, right? Because there's so much focus on pathologizing and identifying what's wrong, and there's a place for that, but there's this spiritual place where what gets created when we see someone having the ability to actually heal has a profound effect.
So, Mary Helen, in what context did you meet her?
It was at a recovery support group I was part of, and she had been around for like 20 years sober, which to me just sound just unbelievable, right? Because that was beyond my wildest imagination. Now for me, it's 39 years, and that's wild to me too, because I think about how 19 years sounded to me. But that's where I met her, and her greatest gift was working with people one-on-one. She was a counselor when mostly men at that time coming back from the Vietnam War, and she would sit with men and help them heal. And we did a lot of deep inner child healing, which was what was required for me. But I think the main thing was this way she saw me. She used to say in her beautiful Southern accent, "Darling, you're so precious." And I would literally feel like I was going to be sick because that was so counter to how my being, like every fiber of my being wanted to reject that. But in that viewing, there was something that started to thaw out. And I started to ask questions like, this is this most beautiful woman, just this beautiful spiritual being. She sees me as that. Who am I not to? So it started to unravel a lot of this.
Hearing that, it's an invitation, but it's also not, I don't want to use too authoritative words, but it's a kind of a command in life. It calls me to want to do it for others, what she did for you, to always look with eyes of seeing you in the light, seeing you as whole, which in my mind, I think that, and I hope I do that, but that story is profound for me. I love that.
Because each of us can do that. And yet a lot of times the people who we're closest to, it might be hard to do that. And I think about young adults. I get to work some with young adults, and I was a young adult at that time, right? 20, 21, 22 when I was doing this work. And I felt so damaged and broken. And when I look at most young adults, a lot of people in their life see them as broken or damaged. And there's so much emphasis or focus on the behavior and the quote unquote acting out, or, I'll say it this way, and it's profoundly simple. I have caused a lot of harm to myself and the world. And every time it was when I felt that I was broken. In other words, hurt people, right? And that was where I was at. The great news is healed people heal people. And we help heal people by seeing something different for them or in them than maybe they have access to or they believe they've lost access to. And to me, that's that deeper spiritual healing.
You just opened up some holy ground. It's amazing.